The screen began to show the recording of a robot, which focused and with precise movements, launched a powerful slap in the air, forming a shockwave. Then, it turned around and performed a powerful kick in the air, which also formed a shockwave. The attention of all the marshals, who were in the conference room of the military department, was fixed on the screen, and their eyes widened and surprised, causing their jaws to drop in shock. No one could believe that Lu Sheng's body refinement technique was so powerful. The eyes of one of the marshals filled with emotion. With a joyful smile, he explained that even though the movements seemed simple, just by observing them at first glance and simulating them in his mind, he felt that many amazing ideas and inspirations arose. The marshal who had a mustache clenched his fist and couldn't help but smile. The marshal who was next to him placed his hands on the table, stood up, and his eyes began to shine with surprise, and a smile spread across his face. It was just as the other marshal had said. Now even his own martial path had been illuminated. It was as if the doors to a new world were opening. All the marshals clenched their fists and began to celebrate, since with Lu Sheng's body refinement technique, everyone would become much stronger than before. The attention of the Central District Marshal focused on them. He stood up and began to ponder in silence. Upon seeing the marshal's excitement, his eyes filled with tranquility. He began to stroke his beard, and with a confident smile realized that they had already noticed how impressive Lu Sheng's technique was. He knew that even though it only seemed like a simple technique, in reality, it was extraordinary when one practiced it. The robot put its hand on its chest and with a smile began to greet everyone. The marshal paused the video, began pointing at the screen with his thumb, and with a confident expression revealed that according to the tests they had conducted, the effect was at least 5 times stronger than that of the 24 body refinement forms currently used by the army. And not only this, Lu Sheng's technique also developed human potential 100 times more. Upon hearing this, the marshals stood up, clenched their fists, and their eyes widened with emotion and surprise. They felt happy because this was a tool that would open a new era in the martial path. The marshal who had a mustache began to imagine a mountain of gold coins, and his eyes expanded with joy, since for him this was a martial treasure of incalculable value, realizing that truly the heavens had blessed the army. He began to imagine Marshal Lu Sheng with his body surrounded by martial flames. He knew that only someone who had truly reached the peak of the martial path, like Lu Sheng, could create such a grand technique from the height of his wisdom. While everyone was fantasizing, one of the marshals raised his hand and coughed. Upon hearing this, the attention of the Central District Marshal and the others focused on him, and their eyes filled with curiosity. The marshal who had raised his hand began to gaze at the marshal of the Central District, extended his hand, and with an expression full of fear asked if such a valuable body refinement technique as this should really be incorporated into the entire army. His eyes widened in terror and concern, explaining that once the technique was put into practice, it was possible that it would not take long before it leaked, and by then he feared it would already be too late. The marshal of the Central District put his arms behind his back, closed his eyes, and with a serene smile explained that this technique was precisely the magnanimity that only a true martial saint of the martial path could possess, revealing that Lu Sheng had already said so. This is a martial technique created to benefit the whole planet. The eyes of all the marshals widened in surprise and confusion. They began to observe him in silence without saying a single word. One of them closed his eyes and with a serious tone realized that he had lived more than 100 years in vain. Lu Sheng was the one who truly had a heart as vast as the starry sky. With the vision of the galactic river, our boy was not only superior in martial strength, but his foresight far surpassed that of other martial saints. The marshal of the Central District extended his hand and made it clear that everyone should feel fortunate because they were now about to witness something never seen before. He clenched his fist, and while his eyes were shining with excitement, With a smile, he revealed that a new era created by the god of war was about to begin. Upon hearing this, everyone got excited and the shouts spread throughout the area. At the same time, not far from the area was the military camp of the eastern region, which was full of helicopters and military vehicles. Somewhere in the camp, there was a soldier doing one-finger handstand push-ups. The man was panting heavily, and on the ground there was a puddle of sweat. He had done 548 push-ups. With his body trembling, the man pushed himself to his limit and did one more push-up. While he was distracted, someone addressed him as Lu Kaming. It was Lu Sheng's friend, who had now slimmed down. Upon hearing his voice, his eyes widened with curiosity. He stopped doing push-ups and with a serious expression asked his friend if there was any problem. A boy wearing glasses began to approach him. He waved at him and with a smile revealed that he had great news. Showing 2 fingers and a cheerful look, the boy mentioned that there were 2 pieces of news, asking which one Lu Kaming wanted to hear first. Lu Kaming, with his face full of sweat, stood up, turned toward his friend, and with a curious tone decided to hear the first piece of news. The boy's eyes began to shine with confidence, and with a smile he revealed that a god of war had been born in the army, a powerful level 9 martial saint, the 4th in all of Dragon. Upon hearing this, Lu Kaming's eyes widened in surprise and confusion. He wanted to know who that god of war was. The boy began to imagine the powerful Lu Sheng surrounded by martial energy. Showing one finger with a sincere expression, he admitted that the name of the martial saint had not been made public, but some speculated it could be General Leon. Lu Sheng, however, after disappearing in Binhai a year ago, nothing had been heard from him since then, so he believed this theory was unlikely. Lu Kaming clenched his fists and with an excited smile admitted that his friend was right. He was very curious, so he asked what the second piece of news was. The boy extended his hands and mentioned that the second news was even better. The army had implemented a new body refinement technique created by none other than the god of the army himself. It was said its effect was 100 times superior to the techniques they practiced before. He took out a USB and his eyes began to shine with excitement and a smile spread across his face, explaining that many soldiers in different areas had broken through their martial bottlenecks the same day they started practicing this technique, and their power had increased drastically. He revealed that everything was stored inside the USB memory. With a cheerful smile, Lu Kaming put his arm around his friend's neck and asked what they were waiting for. He decided to go to the training room immediately. The boy began to smile and did not refuse. Lu Kaming and his friend began heading toward the training room, and as they were slowly moving away, someone who was in the area began watching them silently. It was none other than Lu Sheng, who had his arms crossed. His eyes began to shine with joy upon seeing that his friend had become much stronger than before. While our boy was distracted, a soldier wearing glasses approached, bowed his head before him as a sign of respect, and explained that Lu Kaming had worked very hard, currently had reached the level of second-class martial artist, and had stood out among the new recruits of his generation and following Lu Sheng's orders. They had never sent him on high-risk missions. With a calm gaze, Lu Sheng gave the order to the soldier to in the future provide more resources to Lu Kaming. But without him noticing, the soldier began to observe our boy and nodded his head. Lu Sheng closed his eyes, turned his back on the soldier, and with a smile decided to leave, thinking that strengthening the forces at middle and lower levels was still something positive. If common soldiers had more power to face the Abyss Beast invasion, then they would have better chances of survival. Sometime later, following the recordings, the soldiers began to notice improvements in their bodies. The body of one of them began to emit golden martial energy. Upon seeing this, the man couldn't help but smile and feel joyful. He had reached the 3rd level, realizing that the body refinement technique of the god of war was incredible. A soldier, who had his hand resting on his friend's shoulder, clenched his fist and with a confident smile made it clear that with a god of war in the army. From now on, when they saw disciples of martial saints, they would no longer feel inferior. The friend, who had his arms crossed, began to smile. Every time someone praised and mentioned Lu Sheng, he seemed to feel it somehow. It was a very strange sensation, as if it granted him mystical abilities similar to those of gods in legends. Our boy, who was sitting on the ground, closed his eyes and began to meditate, causing blue and green martial energy to appear around his body. He opened his eyes, which began to shine with surprise. With a smile, he realized that this resembled the veneration of the masses and eternal existence through time, like in those novels from his past life. It was similar to how gods obtained their power based on their followers. Now he felt that he had acquired a touch of divinity. With a curious gaze, our boy could not help but wonder if perhaps he had awakened a new divine ability called rebirth of the flesh. He decided not to become a god since he had to become a symbol. The martial path was him, and he was the martial path. Lu Sheng extended his hands and his body began to release powerful martial flames. Once he reached this point, then all people in the universe who practiced the martial path naturally were going to be his followers. It was already late afternoon, and somewhere in the dragon realm stood the tower of the martial saint. Inside the tower was Tan Zhongyu floating in midair and meditating. His power was so immense that powerful blue energy surrounded his body. Just then, his eyes widened in fear, causing him to lose concentration. He began to gaze toward the ground, not knowing what was happening. His body descended to the ground and his eyes filled with terror. His path and that of Lu Sheng were different. Otherwise, they would not have separated back then. His face filled with sweat, since he never imagined that the impulsive young man from before could now defeat him so easily. Realizing that destiny was unpredictable, he put his hand over his chest and decided to calm down a bit. His martial sword appeared beside him. With a confused gaze, he soon realized that his martial heart was covered in cracks, since that battle had affected him greatly. He let out a sigh and began to laugh. With a penetrating gaze, he began to imagine Lu Sheng staring at him. Instead of feeling fear, his eyes began to shine with confidence, since even if Lu Sheng was stronger than him, that did not mean his martial path was the correct one. Lu Sheng was barely over 20 years old and had already reached a state of invincibility in the world. If someone told Tan Zhongyu that Lu Sheng had not had fortuitous encounters, he would not believe it. The martial saint's eyes filled with rage. He had told Lu Sheng that if one day he became a martial saint, he must destroy the tower, break the martial tradition, and spread the art throughout the world. The martial saint closed his eyes and began to laugh like a madman, being sure that Lu Sheng would not be able to share everything he had learned. With a confident smile, he stood up and thought that now that Lu Sheng was stronger than him, Lu Sheng was right. But if one day he was stronger than Lu Sheng, then his path would be the only true martial path. He clenched his fist tightly and filled himself with determination. The attention of the martial saint focused on his fist. In reality, it was a matter of months before Lu Sheng faced an imminent disaster, since he had dared to steal the energy crystals. When the guide descended, Lu Sheng would have no escape. His death was certain. Just then, a ninja entered the room, bowed before him as a sign of respect, and revealed that Lu Sheng had achieved a new breakthrough. With a curious gaze, Tan Zhongyu clenched his fist and gave the man the order to explain himself. The man revealed that Lu Sheng had implemented his new body refinement technique in the army, and the results were astonishing. Upon hearing this, the martial saint turned around, and his eyes widened in surprise and confusion. The screen lit up and began to show the recording of the soldiers practicing the new technique. The man revealed that Lu Sheng had made his own martial technique public. Now anyone who wished could learn it. Tan Zhongyu's attention was fixed on the screen. He began to observe in silence. His body began to tremble and his eyes started to shine with fear. He could not believe that Lu Sheng had really had the courage to share all his knowledge. He lost control of his body and fell to his knees on the ground. as such an action could not be described as anything less than astonishing. The great Tan Zhongyu fell to his knees on the ground and his world shattered beneath him. With a sincere gaze, he began to look at the ground and admitted defeat, realizing that he was beneath Lu Sheng. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part,